Greetings, everyone. This screencast is going to go in detail on the Deciphering the Prompt assignment. The instructions at the top ask you to make a copy at this link. Clicking on Deciphering the Prompt forces you to make a copy where you want to rename your document. Instead of copy of, you want to click up in the top and rename it to your first and last name. I just put Joe Student, but it would be your name, first and last. That way, when you turn it in, from the title of the document, I can tell whose assignment it is. Deciphering the prompt looks like this. If you have a copy that for some reason has an outdated due date, it should say October 13th and submit to Schoology. So if it says anything but Schoology, just know that you probably got an older version of the document, depending on when you clicked on your link. Please review the first two essential questions so that you know what learning goals that we have. And then for deciphering the prompt, please pause the video and read through the directions. Now that you've read through the directions, you want to look at writing prompts 1 and 2. I've already highlighted some of the active verbs in the prompt. These are not very good prompts. They ask students to do tasks that may not be very sophisticated. I want to use these as a teaching model to discuss with you what students ought to do. You won't always be my student, and I want you prepared to be able to take common sense and understand what the tasks ask you to do. It shouldn't be the first essay you've ever written. So this assignment really asks you to bring that experience to it and use common sense to figure out what you should answer. So the first prompt asks you to compare and contrast the characters of Romeo and Juliet. It kind of seems like an absurd question to ask. Romeo is a guy and Juliet's a girl. What else is there to say? I think what the teacher probably is really asking, and we took these prompts from actual teacher websites, by the way, what I think these prompts are really asking is to discuss the dynamic of Romeo and Juliet, the way they interact with each other and how they were drawn to each other. What was it about their relationship that was attractive to each other? But that's not very clear from the prompt. So when you think about comparing and contrasting Romeo and Juliet, you think that's kind of ridiculous. Why would I want to do that? Sometimes you're going to be given these questions and you want to think, what would a sophisticated and deeper answer be based on my experience as a student and as a writer? How would the author state they develop throughout the play? It's a very wordy question, but really, if you think about character development, that relates to character change. So in this, you think, well, comparing and contrasting the two characters and how they develop, it seems like their relationship is what the centerpiece of this essay should be, what makes them fall in love with one another. Again, that relates to character traits. It is not worded very well, what makes them fall in love with one another. The teacher ought to think about rephrasing this prompt so that it's a little bit more clear in pushing students towards an academic response. But it's a good teaching tool for you guys to see that sometimes teachers have the best intentions, but the questions that they're asking do not direct you towards a deeper answer. But you should also pay close attention to what it's asking you and to ask for clarification whenever it's not clear. Finally, it says to use quotes from the play to support your claims. And these usually come with many reminders. Use quotes to support, revise for mechanical and grammatical correctness, format it in MLA format. What follows the prompt usually has these detailed instructions. So really, I would say that with this essay, you would want to discuss the dynamic of Romeo and Juliet as far as maybe one is more optimistic and one is more pessimistic, one is more naive, where the other one may be more worldly and experienced. And what is it about the two that draws them together? But again, this is probably not going to be a really interesting essay to write. I would recommend taking a prompt like this, rephrasing it into your own student-friendly language, and when confused, ask the teacher, does this make sense? Did I misunderstand the prompt? Is this what it's really asking me? And that might alert the teacher to some confusion. All right, so then what you'll do is, let's just stick with writing prompt number 1. As you scroll through, you'll see questions that ask you to respond. And so prompt number 1, what is my purpose? Looking back at it, my purpose is to compare, contrast the character traits of Romeo and Juliet. Do I have to explain the significance of a particular topic? Notice it doesn't ask you to really do much other than I am supposed to discuss their development. Then you'll continue answering in blue for prompt number 1. What am I expected to cover? I am expected to cover the character traits of, and I'll let you finish that sentence. From what perspective or point of view? Well, in this case, what kind of essay is this? This is a compare and contrast analytical essay. So if you didn't know this, what you should know is that I need to write this in the third person. He, she, her, him, they. This is an academic essay, so you always write in the third person in an academic essay. I'm going to ask you to compare and contrast. I'm going to ask you to argue, and that's going to be in the third person. For audience, you would be addressing your teacher and the literary community. That's a fancy way of saying that there's an ongoing discussion about literature, and your essay will be part of that discussion. If it gets published, it will reach a wider audience. The type of genre, the first one is, this genre is a response to literature. What do you know about the genre? I know about this genre that I should, and this would be things like citing the quotes by page number, author name, referring to author by last name, stuff like that. Does the prompt ask me to use outside sources? Outside would be books or resources about Romeo and Juliet. And if you look at the prompt, it certainly does not ask you to use any sources, just quotes from the play. So going back to that question, I am only supposed to use quotes from the play. You have to focus on a specific text. Yes, Romeo and Juliet. Are there clues in the prompt that help organize or outline the paper? Looking back at the assignment, you can see there are questions that follow. Again, they aren't particularly very good, but one paragraph could be on how they develop, maybe one paragraph on Romeo's development, one paragraph on Juliet's development, and then one paragraph about what makes them fall in love with one another. But it should be said that you may realize that the second question needs to come first. So maybe this would be your first body paragraph about what makes them fall in love with one another, and then how that love led them to develop. That is up to you, but the guiding questions that follow get you to think about ideas for topics for your paragraphs. So again, that was for question number 8. And that takes us to writing prompt number 2. Now again, these are not the best writing prompts. So we're looking at these so that they're a model of how students can survive if a teacher gives them a question that's poorly worded. What common sense can they use to figure out what they're supposed to do? So for the prompt number 2, from the perspective of Juliet's chaperone, discuss the relationships between the parents and children in Romeo and Juliet. How do Romeo and Juliet interact with their parents? Are they rebellious in the modern sense? How do their parents feel about them? Use quotes from the play to support your claims. Now I've highlighted the verb discuss, which is a bit confusing because in what format are you supposed to discuss? Usually teachers are going to use verbs like this and they really mean explain or argue. So discuss is not a very good verb for an assignment. And again, if I were this teacher, I would want to rethink the way I word my instructions. It asks you to write from the perspective of Juliet's chaperone. So that certainly sounds like it is a Fictional piece is a creative piece where you write as if you are Juliet's chaperone. So, in the one question about point of view, that would actually be first person. I am writing in the perspective of Juliet's chaperone in the first person. And notice how, for some reason, this got highlighted. So you want to unhighlight that. So that's something to be aware of. Now, again, this teacher may or may not want a creative response, but they weren't very clear. Any answer that you put on here that was reasonable is obviously understandable and respectable because students need to use common sense to figure it out. But the phrase "from the perspective of Juliet's chaperone" makes you think that it is as if you are that character. You can see the guiding questions. How do Romeo and Juliet interact with their parents? Are they rebellious in the modern sense? How do their parents feel about them? It's more about the parent and child relationship. Now, certainly, this kind of assignment may be really asking the students to be critical of the play and the relationship between the parents, but that isn't particularly clear with the way that it's worded. So you can only really go by what's in the text. All right, so purpose of your writing, you are to discuss the relationships between parents and children. That's pretty obvious. Again, what are you supposed to cover? That's how, instead of their development, it's interactions with their parents, their rebelliousness, and their parents' feelings about them. And then we already got the perspective. Who is your audience? Well, it would be a similar thing. I would be addressing my teacher and the literary community, even though it may be more of a creative piece. Now, for creative writing, what do you know about this genre? Would you include dialogue? Would you include description? Those kinds of things will go in question number 5. Number 6, does the prompt ask you to use outside sources? Well, I think it does tell you to use quotes from the play. Yes. So you'll want to work those quotes into your story. Well, that may be difficult to do given what it's asking you to. Don't worry, we're not having you do either of those tasks. These are just for practice to know what the question is asking you. But as far as outside sources, no, you're only supposed to use quotes from the play. So you can use the same answer from number 1 in number 2. Does the prompt tell me to focus on a specific play? Yes, both are Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. And then, are there clues in the prompt that outline my paper? Again, these are the questions that follow. Now, again, I don't want you to get too nervous about these kinds of prompts. You won't be writing on prompts like this, but if you happen to be in a class where the teacher provides prompts that don't make a lot of sense, you would want to understand what would be reasonable. And so for writing prompt number 1, if you were to simply state something simple like Romeo's a boy and Juliet's a girl, you wouldn't be doing a very deep job. You'd be doing a pretty superficial job analyzing. Since it asks you to how they develop and it asks you what makes them fall in love with each other, this is perhaps looking at how they work as a dynamic romantic couple, how they changed as a result of their relationship. That probably should be clarified in the question, but it would be common sense to think that that's probably what it's asking you to do. Always good to check with your teacher to make sure that you are interpreting it that way and it's correct. And the same for number 2. The question is not particularly clear, but it does seem like it is asking you to be creative in thinking about Juliet's chaperone and perhaps what she observes and the dynamic. Would she approve or disapprove of the kid's rebelliousness, etc.? But again, not like a great answer, not a great prompt to get good, deep analysis. So once you finish that, you go back to deciphering the prompt, and you'll notice that the only way to submit it is through this turnitin.com link. If you click on that, you can upload your file there. This is just a 10-point assignment, and it's for practice. But you can see the scoring rubric here, and you're scored on clarity and language conventions. All right,